Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial, already a vortex of shocking claims and crumbling empires, took another bizarre and deeply unsettling turn when Robert Meek Mill Williams was called to the witness stand. The air in the New York courtroom, thick with allegations of sex trafficking and systemic abuse, crackled with a new kind of tension. Meek Mill, a titan of battle rap and a figure who had his own complex history within the orbits of music industry power players like Diddy, was an unexpected and potentially explosive witness. His presence signaled that the prosecution was delving into the notorious rumors surrounding Diddy's private parties and the strange, uncomfortable details that had long been whispered about in hushed tones. With a somber expression, Meek Mill recounted his experiences at Diddy's opulent gatherings, events that he described as initially alluring but quickly revealing a disturbing undercurrent. He testified not to direct personal abuse, but to witnessing an environment meticulously curated by Diddy, an atmosphere ripe with excess, power plays, and a pervasive sense of unease. The most startling part of his testimony centered on a seemingly innocuous item, baby oil, and its conspicuous, unsettling presence in private areas of Diddy's parties, often alongside other paraphernalia that made Meek deeply uncomfortable, and now, in retrospect, deeply suspicious. The carefully polished image of Combs as a cultural icon and business visionary had been sandblasted away, revealing a portrait of a man alleged to be a manipulative and dangerous predator. The defense was embattled, fighting a multi-front war against a tidal wave of accusers and corroborating evidence. Each day brought fresh scrutiny, each new witness another potential crack in Diddy's crumbling fortress of denial. The public, glued to the proceedings, had watched as powerful celebrity figures had taken the stand, some to Diddy's detriment, further isolating the once untouchable mogul. It was against this backdrop of a career and legacy in freefall that the prosecution announced its intention to call Robert Meek Mill Williams. The Philadelphia rapper, known for his raw street narratives and his own high-profile brushes with the justice system, was a surprising addition to the witness list. His connection to Diddy was primarily through the wider music industry network, but rumors and internet chatter had often linked their names in speculative, sometimes uncomfortable contexts. As Meek Mill entered the courtroom and approached the witness stand, a palpable buzz went through the gallery. Diddy, seated at the defense table, watched his entrance with a mixture of surprise and barely concealed disdain. There was no known public feud between them, akin to those with other artists, making Meek's appearance as a prosecution witness all the more intriguing and potentially damaging. Meek, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed to underscore the seriousness of his purpose, was sworn in. His usual confident, almost brash demeanor was replaced by a look of solemn gravity. He knew the world was watching, and his testimony was poised to shed light on aspects of Diddy's private world that few had spoken about under oath. The prosecutor began by establishing Meek Mill's credentials in the music industry and the nature of his interactions with Sean Combs over the years. Meek confirmed he had attended several of Diddy's famously lavish parties, both at his sprawling mansions and at exclusive, rented-out venues. These were the events that had become legendary for their opulence, celebrity guest lists, and as the trial was now revealing, their allegedly dark secrets. "Mr. Williams," the prosecutor started, his tone measured, "can you describe the general atmosphere at these parties hosted by Mr. Combs? What was the typical environment like, especially in the more private areas or later into the night?" Meek paused, collecting his thoughts before describing scenes of overwhelming excess. "They were wild, man," Meek began, his voice steady. "Anything you could imagine, it was there. Music, endless drinks, beautiful people everywhere. But the further you got into the inner circle, into the back rooms or the upstairs areas, the vibe changed. It got weirder, more intense. Less like a party, more like something else was going on. Something a lot of us weren't fully comfortable with." The prosecutor then carefully approached the specific subject that had been hinted at in pretrial motions and had set the internet abuzz. "Mr. Williams, During your time at these private gatherings, did you ever observe any specific items or substances being made available or used in a way that struck you as unusual or unsettling, particularly in these more private settings? Meek Mill shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident. Yeah, he said, his voice dropping slightly. There was always a lot of stuff around, but one thing that always weirded me out, that seemed out of place but always there in those back rooms, was baby oil. Like big bottles of it, alongside other things. The mention of baby oil hung in the air. It was a detail that had been the subject of crude jokes and online speculation for years, often tied to Diddy in a derogatory way. But hearing it mentioned in federal court by a prominent rapper under oath stripped away the humor and replaced it with a sense of grim curiosity. What was its purpose in these alleged inner sanctums? Can you describe the context in which you saw this baby oil? The prosecutor asked. What other things did you observe alongside it? And what impression did this leave on you? Meek explained, choosing his words with care, clearly wanting to convey the unease without veering into graphic territory the court might restrict. It wasn't like, for skincare out in the open. Meek clarified. It would be in these private suites, these rooms where Puff would take certain people. Sometimes you'd see it near cameras, or with, toys or stuff that suggested things were about to get real explicit, beyond just a regular party vibe. It made me feel like that oil was there for facilitation, to make things slicker, easier for whatever intense stuff they were planning. He continued. The vibe around it wasn't playful. It felt, clinical or like part of a setup. It wasn't about sensuality, it felt more about utility. Like it was a tool for what was about to happen in those rooms, combined with the number of really young-looking people often around and how out of it some of them seemed, it just gave me a bad feeling. A really bad feeling. Diddy's attorney immediately objected. Objection. Speculation as to the purpose of a common household item. The judge partially sustained, instructing the jury to disregard Meek's speculation on the specific intent, but allowed the testimony about its presence and the surrounding context to stand. The point, however, had been made. Baby oil was a recurring, strangely prominent feature in Diddy's private party zones. The prosecutor then asked Meek if he ever discussed the presence of the baby oil or the general atmosphere of these private spaces with Diddy or anyone in his immediate circle. Meek shook his head. Nah, man. That wasn't the kind of thing you questioned Puff about. You saw what you saw, and you kept your mouth shut if you wanted to stay in the circle, if you wanted to keep getting invited, keep your career moving. There was an unspoken code. Did you ever witness Mr. Combs himself directly interacting with this baby oil or instructing others in its use? The prosecutor inquired. Meek stated he hadn't seen Diddy personally applying it or giving direct orders about it, but emphasized its consistent availability in Diddy's most private party areas, almost like a standard provision. It was just there, Meek reiterated, like the champagne or the drugs. Part of the Diddy party pack, but for those specific sealed-off rooms. And the people going in and out of those rooms with Puff, they weren't going in for a tanhua. It implied a certain kind of activity, and that oil was part of the toolkit for it. That's the vibe it gave off, and it was unsettling. The prosecution wasn't necessarily trying to prove a specific crime with the baby oil itself, but rather to paint a picture of the environment Diddy cultivated, an environment where, they argued, sexual exploitation and coercion were normalized and even facilitated with specific props. Meek Mill's testimony about this seemingly mundane item in this specific context added another layer to that disturbing picture. Meek Mill went on to describe the general power dynamics at Diddy's events. He spoke of how Diddy seemed to revel in being the puppet master, controlling the guest list, the flow of substances, and who had access to the most exclusive hidden parts of the party. Puff was like a king in those situations, Meek said. Everyone orbited him. What he wanted, he got. And no one really said no to him, at least not to his face. He recounted instances where he saw Diddy subtly isolating younger individuals, both male and female, guiding them away from their friends and into these private areas. He had a way of making people feel special, chosen, Meek explained. But there was always an edge to it, like they were being selected for something they might not fully understand or be comfortable with. The presence of things like the oil in those VIP spots just amplified that creepy feeling. The prosecutor asked if Meek ever felt pressured to participate in activities he wasn't comfortable with at these parties. Meek stated that while he wasn't directly forced into anything, the pressure to conform, to at least turn a blind eye, was immense. "You didn't want to be the guy who killed the vibe or asked too many questions," he admitted. There were career implications, everyone knew that. This spoke directly to the prosecution's narrative of a culture of silence and complicity that Diddy allegedly fostered, enabling his behavior to continue unchecked for years. Meek's testimony, as an established industry figure, gave credence to the idea that even successful peers felt a certain pressure to go along or look away. Diddy's reaction during Meek's testimony about the baby oil was one of dismissive annoyance. He scoffed quietly, shook his head, and whispered to his lawyer, seemingly trying to project that the claims were ridiculous or irrelevant. However, the steady, uncomfortable testimony from Meek was clearly registering with the jury, who listened intently, their faces unreadable. The cross-examination was sharp. Diddy's lawyer attempted to frame Meek's testimony as vague and based on misinterpretations. "Mr. Williams, are you seriously trying to tell this court that the presence of a common moisturizing product at a party is somehow evidence of wrongdoing by my client?" the lawyer asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Meek Mill didn't flinch. "I'm telling you what I saw, where I saw it, and the vibe it gave off in that specific context, around a lot of other questionable stuff. It wasn't in the bathroom for dry hands. It was in private rooms with cameras and other gear, where Puff was taking people for God knows what. It was part of that scene, and it was creepy as hell, man." The defense lawyer pressed on. "Isn't it possible that this baby oil was used for massages, something entirely innocent?" Meek conceded it was possible in a vacuum, but reiterated, "Not with the whole picture, not with the way those back rooms operated, not with the feeling you got. It felt like it was there to make messed up stuff happen easier. That's my honest take on it, from being there." The impact of Meek Mill's testimony was less about a single shocking accusation and more about adding to the cumulative weight of evidence, painting Diddy's private world as a place of predatory behavior and exploitation. The baby oil in this narrative became a symbol of the sordid, uncomfortable realities hidden behind the velvet ropes of Diddy's empire. It suggested a level of premeditation and facilitation for the alleged freak-offs and other sexual encounters that the prosecution was trying to prove. It wasn't just spontaneous debauchery, Meek's testimony implied. It was an environment with props and tools readily available for specific, often unsettling, purposes. Media outlets seized on the baby oil detail, though many struggled with how to report it without sensationalizing the underlying, often unspoken, insinuations that had long followed Diddy. Meek's testimony, however, gave it a new, more ominous context within the framework of a federal trial. Legal analysts pointed out that while the baby oil itself wasn't illegal, its consistent presence in the specific context Meek described, private rooms, near cameras, alongside other toys, with vulnerable-seeming individuals, could help the prosecution establish that Diddy created and controlled environments designed for illicit and potentially coercive sexual activities. It helped paint a picture of Diddy's alleged MO, luring people with fame and luxury, then isolating them in spaces where their guards were down, substances were plentiful, and the tools for certain kinds of encounters, including items like baby oil for facilitation, were readily at hand. Meek's admission of the unspoken code of silence and his own reluctance to question Diddy's actions further bolstered the prosecution's claim of a culture of fear and intimidation surrounding comms, which is a key element in racketeering charges. The testimony also subtly chipped away at Diddy's attempts to portray himself as a victim of disgruntled ex-associates or accusers with ulterior motives. Meek Mill had no obvious axe to grind, no direct financial claim against Diddy in this trial. He was presented as a reluctant witness of fact, testifying to what he observed. The discomfort Meek expressed, the bad feeling and creepy vibe he repeatedly mentioned, resonated because it wasn't an accusation of a specific crime committed against him. but rather his unease as a bystander, witnessing an environment he instinctively felt was wrong and exploitative. This kind of testimony, focusing on atmosphere and recurring unsettling details, can be very effective in building a circumstantial case, helping jurors connect the dots between Diddy's alleged control, the nature of his parties, and the specific allegations of trafficking and abuse. For Diddy, Meek Mill's appearance was another significant blow. It demonstrated that even those who weren't direct victims in the traditional sense could provide damning testimony about the world he allegedly created and the disturbing practices within it. It showed the rot was widespread. The phrase, Diddy party pack, as Meek termed it, with baby oil included alongside drugs and alcohol as a standard provision for Diddy's private encounters, was a particularly damaging soundbite, suggesting routine preparation for potentially sordid activities. The prosecution was methodically constructing a mosaic of Diddy's alleged dark world, and Meek Mill's testimony, with its unsettling focus on the baby oil and the creepy atmosphere of the backrooms, was another crucial tile firmly placed. It also served to humanize the often abstract and lurid details of the trial. Meek, a well-known figure, expressing his own discomfort and sense of wrongness about what he witnessed, could make the situation more relatable and believable for the jury. The king in those situations' description of Diddy reinforced the image of him as an all-powerful figure operating with impunity within his own curated domains, where his desires were law and others were mere pawns or props. The defense's attempt to normalize the presence of baby oil seemed to fall flat against Meek's consistent testimony about the specific, unsettling context in which he repeatedly observed it. It wasn't just the item, but where it was and what it implied, that made his testimony impactful. This testimony also tapped into years of underground rumors and blind items about Diddy's parties, lending a new air of credibility to whispers that had previously been dismissed by some as mere gossip or homophobic slander. Meek was saying under oath that there was indeed something deeply unsettling about those private scenes. The image of Diddy selecting younger individuals and guiding them to these private areas where items like baby oil were present painted a disturbing picture of grooming and predatory behavior, aligning with the core charges of the trial. Meek Mill didn't need to accuse Diddy of a specific crime related to the baby oil. He simply needed to plant a strong seed of doubt and disgust in the jury's mind about the kind of activities that item was intended to facilitate in Diddy's world, and he accomplished that effectively. This testimony underscored the prosecution's argument that Diddy's mansions and party venues were not just places of celebration, but potential crime scenes, equipped and prepared for the exploitation of individuals. The fact that Meek, a peer in the industry, felt the implicit threat and the need to keep his mouth shut spoke volumes about the coercive power Diddy allegedly wielded, a power that extended beyond employees or romantic partners. Diddy's dismissive reaction in court, scoffing at Meek's testimony, could be interpreted by the jury as the arrogance of a man who believed he was above scrutiny, or the nervousness of someone whose private, unsavory habits were being exposed. The prosecution was effectively using Meek to give the jury a guided tour into the inner sanctum of Diddy's world, and the tour was revealing an environment filled with red flags and deeply uncomfortable truths. The lingering image from Meek's testimony would be that of Diddy's private rooms, stocked not just with luxury items, but with tools like baby oil, ready for encounters that were, at best, morally questionable, and at worst, criminally exploitative. This was less about a smoking gun, and more about adding to a pervasive pattern of behavior, creating an undeniable atmosphere of sleaze and potential criminality that surrounded Diddy's private life. Meek Mill's reluctance, his careful wording, and his admissions of discomfort actually made his testimony more believable than if he had come in with overly sensational or graphic accusations. He sounded like someone who had seen things he wished he hadn't, and was now grappling with the implications. The utility of the baby oil, as Meek described it, rather than any sensual purpose, was a particularly chilling observation, suggesting a detached, almost procedural approach to the encounters Diddy allegedly orchestrated. The prosecution successfully used Meek Mill to turn internet rumors and innuendo about Diddy and baby oil into sworn testimony, forcing Diddy to confront these whispers in the harsh reality of a federal courtroom. This testimony, while not alleging a direct act of trafficking by Diddy against Meek himself, served as powerful corroboration of the kind of environment where the trafficking and abuse of others, as alleged by victims like Cassie, could readily occur. The detail about cameras being present near where the baby oil was kept also subtly reinforced allegations that Diddy recorded sexual encounters, often without full consent, for potential leverage or his own gratification. Meek Mill's testimony provided a crucial bridge for the jury, connecting the seemingly glamorous public world of Diddy's parties with the dark, coercive private reality that the prosecution was alleging. The cumulative effect of testimonies like Meek's was to strip away any remaining doubt that Diddy's private life was far removed from the polished image he presented, and was instead a realm of calculated excess and potential exploitation. The phrase facilitation, used by Meek regarding the baby oil, though not overly sexual, was potent in its implication, suggesting that Diddy actively enabled and equipped his environment for specific, potentially non-consensual, sexual purposes. Diddy's empire of secrets was being dismantled piece by piece, witness by witness, and Meek Mill had just delivered another significant blow by giving context to one of the most persistent and unsavory rumors attached to Diddy's name. The prosecution likely felt that Meek's testimony, even without detailing explicit sexual acts, effectively conveyed the inherent creepiness and potential for abuse in Diddy's private party settings. The suggestion was enough. This testimony added another layer to the complex portrayal of Diddy, not just a violent controller of women or a business manipulator, but also the host of deeply unsettling private events where the lines of consent were allegedly blurred or erased. The jury was left to consider why a common household item like baby oil would be so consistently present and prominent in the most private and intense areas of a music mogul's parties. And Meek Mill had provided them with a deeply uncomfortable but plausible context. The unspoken code that Meek Mill described was now being systematically broken on the witness stand, with each revelation making it harder for Diddy to maintain any semblance of innocence or plausible deniability. Even if Diddy's lawyers could argue that Meek's interpretation of the baby oil's purpose was speculative, the fact that such a prominent figure felt such profound unease about it within Diddy's private spaces spoke volumes. Meek Mill's testimony served to demystify and simultaneously make more sinister the rumors about Diddy's parties. He brought them from the realm of internet gossip into the stark reality of federal evidence. The prosecution was building a powerful narrative that Diddy's entire lifestyle, not just isolated incidents, was geared towards exploitation and control. And Meek's observations about the party props and atmosphere fit seamlessly into that narrative. Ultimately, Meek Mill's exposure of Diddy and the implied use of the baby oil contributed to the overwhelming sense that Diddy's private world was a place where dark appetites were catered to, and where vulnerability was seen as an opportunity for exploitation. As Meek Mill stepped down, the courtroom was left to ponder his unsettling testimony, which, while avoiding explicit details, had managed to cast one of the most disturbing shadows yet over Sean Combs and the carefully curated, now collapsing world he had built.